My new husband's daughter insulted me in front of my family. When I confronted her, he humiliated me. She is not your daughter. Do not correct her. I just smiled. Fine. The next morning, her car tuition and allowance were all gone. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who completely underestimated your worth. Growing up, I learned that silence is often a woman's loudest weapon, but knowing when to use it requires absolute precision. My name is Naomi, and I am 38 years old. I built a private equity empire from scratch, but to the people sitting around my custom mahogany dining table, I was just a lucky woman who managed to secure a wealthy, successful husband. We were celebrating our one-year wedding anniversary in the formal dining room of our sprawling estate in Buckhead, Atlanta. The room was bathed in the warm, ambient glow of the fireplace, illuminating the contemporary art pieces I had carefully curated to celebrate Black excellence. It was supposed to be a night of pure joy. Instead, it became the exact moment the illusion of my perfect marriage shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Marcus, my 45-year-old husband, sat at the head of the table. He wore a tailored suit and an expensive watch, playing the role of the ultimate provider, a successful entrepreneur who supposedly carried the entire family on his broad shoulders. To his right sat his 19-year-old daughter, Chloe. She had spent the entire evening rolling her eyes, aggressively texting on her phone, and making loud, passive-aggressive sighs whenever Marcus reached over to hold my hand. I had spent the past 12 months trying to be a patient, understanding stepmother, making allowances for her transition, but her hostility had only metastasized into blatant disrespect. The tension finally snapped during the main course. I was wearing a custom white silk dress, a piece I had commissioned specifically for this anniversary. As the private chef cleared the salad plates, Chloe suddenly reached across the table for the salt shaker. She did not ask anyone to pass it. Instead, her arm knocked directly into my crystal glass of vintage red wine. I watched in slow motion as the dark crimson liquid cascaded over the rim, splashing directly onto my lap and completely ruining the pristine white silk. I gasped instinctively, pushing my chair back as the cold wine soaked through the fabric. The entire table fell dead silent. I looked up at Chloe, expecting at least a feigned look of surprise or a muttered apology. Instead, she sat back in her chair, crossed her arms, and stared at me with a smirk so deeply malicious it made my blood run cold. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the shock vibrating through my chest. "An apology would be appropriate right now." She scoffed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the quiet room. "I am not apologizing to a gold digger." She flipped her perfectly styled braids over her shoulder and looked around the table to ensure everyone was listening. "My dad bought this house. He bought the food on this table, and he definitely paid for that dress you are wearing. You are not my mother. You are just a glorified maid who managed to secure a ring." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I slowly turned my gaze to Marcus, fully expecting him to slam his hand down, to demand respect for his wife, to discipline the spoiled teenager sitting beside him. I waited for the man I married to stand up and defend me. Instead, Marcus deliberately set his wine glass down with a heavy thud. He did not look at his daughter. His eyes, burning with sudden, inexplicable anger, locked directly onto mine. "She is not your daughter, Naomi," he growled, his voice vibrating with warning. "Do not ever raise your voice to teach her a lesson in this house. You are the one making a massive deal out of absolutely nothing. It was an accident. Go upstairs and change if it bothers you that much, but stop ruining the mood." I felt the floor drop out from underneath me. It was not just the defense of her terrible behavior, it was the public humiliation, the blatant disregard for my dignity in front of his entire family. But before I could even process the magnitude of his betrayal, another voice chimed in. "Come on, Naomi." It was Todd, the 40-year-old white husband of Marcus's sister, Vanessa. Todd was an arrogant, mediocre lawyer who constantly overcompensated by inserting himself into family business. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon with a patronizing grin that made my stomach turn. "Do not act like an angry black woman on Marcus's special anniversary. The man works his fingers to the bone to feed this family and keep a roof over your head." You really should know your place, be grateful for what you have, and just leave the poor girl alone. The deeply ingrained prejudice and sheer delusion in Todd's words were breathtaking. They honestly believed this narrative. They had convinced themselves that Marcus was the wealthy king of the castle, and I was merely a destitute woman lucky enough to be brought along for the ride. In that fraction of a second, any lingering affection I had for this family evaporated. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not give Todd the satisfaction of fulfilling his racist stereotype. Instead, I calmly picked up my linen napkin and dabbed at the ruined silk. I looked at the three people who had just cemented their own downfall. I smiled a slow, chilling smile. Fine, I said. Tomorrow you will all learn the absolute unvarnished ultimate truth. I sat at my sleek marble desk where I had been working for 3 hours. I took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the silence. At 7 in the morning, the household was dead to the world, sleeping off their unearned luxury. Today, that silence was a ticking clock. I made my moves late last night after Marcus and his daughter went to sleep. I knew exactly when the illusion would break. It started precisely at 8:15. From my window overlooking the driveway, I had the perfect vantage point. Chloe emerged perfectly styled for an exclusive Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority brunch. She marched down the steps holding her phone and keys. She pressed the unlock button on her key fob. Nothing happened. She pressed it again harder. Still nothing. Finally, she dragged her eyes away from her screen. Her matte black Mercedes G-Wagon was gone. She stood there turning in a slow circle as if a massive vehicle could somehow hide behind a hedge. Her perfectly painted face contorted from confusion to irritation. She immediately dialed a number. Her frantic pacing told the whole story. Missing her car was only the first domino to fall. I had severed her financial lifeline. 10 minutes prior, she placed a mobile order for her Starbucks coffee. My phone had buzzed with a declined transaction notification. The unlimited black card she treated like a personal piggy bank was now a useless piece of plastic. Dad! The scream echoed up to my office, piercing the quiet morning. It was a shrill, panicked sound, the cry of a spoiled child realizing the world was no longer bowing to her whims. Dad, where is my car? I turned away from the window and focused on my monitors. I did not have to wait long. Heavy, furious footsteps thundered up the grand staircase. The oak doors of my office were violently shoved open, slamming against the walls with a deafening crack. Marcus stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his face twisted in pure rage. He was still wearing his silk pajama pants, having clearly been jolted out of bed by his daughter's hysterics. He marched across the room and slammed a crumpled piece of paper down directly onto my keyboard. It was a towing receipt left in the mailbox by the impound company I contracted at 3 in the morning. Are you out of your mind? Marcus roared, his voice booming. You called the police and had my daughter's car towed away. Are you actually crazy? That is the car I bought for her. You have absolutely no right to touch her things. I did not flinch. I simply moved the crumpled receipt off my keyboard, smoothed it out, and looked up at him. The sheer entitlement radiating from him was almost comical. You bought it? I asked, my tone dangerously even. That is very interesting, Marcus. I suggest you read the registration papers you so carelessly signed without looking. Marcus glared at me, his breathing heavy. What are you talking about? I paid for that car. You used a corporate account to lease that vehicle. I corrected him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The registration clearly states that the vehicle belongs to Obsidian Partners. As the founder and sole chief executive officer of Obsidian Partners, I have a legal obligation to protect company assets. I simply reported the vehicle as stolen because the current driver has absolutely no authorization to operate company property. Marcus stared at me, the angry flush on his face slowly giving way to a sickening pale realization. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words seemed to die in his throat. For the past 3 years, he had been living in a financial fantasy, swiping cards and signing documents without ever paying attention to the fine print, assuming my wealth was simply his to distribute as he pleased. He forgot who actually owned the empire. "You are doing this because of what happened last night," he accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are punishing a teenager because your feelings got hurt over a spilled glass of wine. You are being petty and vindictive, Naomi." "I am being a responsible business owner," I replied smoothly, turning back to my computer screen. "And I am simply following your explicit instructions. You told me she is not my daughter and I have no right to correct her. You were absolutely right. So from now on, I will not spend a single dime of my hard-earned money maintaining her lifestyle. I am cutting the dead weight." Marcus let out a harsh, bitter laugh, trying to regain his dominant posture. "You think you can control me with this? You think taking away a car is going to break us? You are pathetic. I will just go buy her a new one right now. I will buy her a better one." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his prized possession, the solid metal VIP bank card he loved to flash at expensive country club galas. He glared at me triumphantly as if this piece of metal proved his ultimate superiority. He tapped his phone screen, furiously opening a luxury rideshare app to order Chloe a premium black car service to take her to the dealership. I watched him with quiet anticipation. I waited for the exact moment reality would crash down on him. He hit confirm. The screen loaded, then a sharp, jarring beep echoed from his phone. Marcus frowned, tapping the screen again. The same beep followed. His confident sneer began to falter. He opened his banking app, his thumb jabbing at the screen with increasing desperation. A second later, a text message alert chimed loudly in the quiet office. I watched the blood completely drain from my husband's face as he read the notification from the bank. His precious, limitless account was permanently frozen, and this was only the beginning of his absolute and total ruin. Marcus tapped the screen of his phone with trembling fingers. He muttered under his breath, convinced it was a simple glitch, a banking error that happened to wealthy men all the time. He pulled out a second card, a platinum credit card, and typed the numbers into the app. Another sharp beep. Declined. The veins in his neck began to bulge. He opened his primary banking application, the one that usually displayed a comforting 7-figure balance. A bold red banner flashed across the top of his screen. "Authorized user privileges revoked. Contact primary account holder." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "You canceled my cards," he whispered, the booming rage from earlier completely gone, replaced by a hollow rasp. "How could you cancel my cards? Those are my accounts." I leaned back in my leather chair and folded my hands. "They were never your accounts, Marcus. You were merely an authorized user on my private wealth management portfolio. I allowed you the illusion of ownership because it kept your fragile ego intact. But since you boldly proclaimed that I am just a glorified maid in this house, I decided a maid has no business managing the finances of a supposed king. Let us see how the king provides without my money." Before Marcus could formulate a response, the sound of the front door chiming echoed up the stairs. Heavy, urgent footsteps clicked across the marble foyer. Chloe had clearly made a frantic phone call summoning reinforcements. "Naomi!" A sharp nasal voice shouted from the hallway. It was Vanessa, Marcus's younger sister, marching into my office with her husband Todd trailing right behind her. Vanessa was dressed in her Sunday best, clutching a designer bag I had paid for last Christmas. Todd marched in with the unearned confidence of a mediocre white man who believed his mere presence commanded authority. He wore his weekend golf attire, his face flushed with righteous indignation. "What on earth is going on here?" Vanessa shrieked, rushing over to Marcus, who was still staring blankly at his useless phone. "Chloe is crying in the driveway. She said you stole her car and locked Marcus out of the bank." Todd stepped forward physically, placing himself between me and his brother-in-law. He puffed out his chest and pointed a rigid finger directly at my face. "Listen to me very carefully, Naomi," he said, using his practiced courtroom voice, hoping to intimidate me. "What you are doing right now is highly illegal. You are committing textbook financial abuse." I raised a single eyebrow, completely unbothered by his aggressive posturing. "Financial abuse," I repeated softly. "Yes," Todd barked, emboldened by my calm demeanor. "Marcus is the primary breadwinner of this family. He owns the largest network of suburban car dealerships in the metropolitan area. He provides the lifestyle you enjoy. You cannot just throw a temper tantrum, hijack his bank accounts, and disrupt his business operations. If you do not unlock those accounts right this second, I will personally file an injunction against you. I will drag you into court and sue you for every penny you are worth. The sheer audacity of this man trying to explain my own life to me was astounding. They had all lived in this delusion for so long that they actually believed the lies Marcus spun. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the built-in mahogany bookshelf behind my desk. I pulled out a heavy, thick financial portfolio bound in black leather. I turned around and walked directly up to Todd. I did not hand it to him. I slammed it hard right into the center of his chest. Todd gasped, stumbling backward a step, as he fumbled to catch the heavy binder before it hit the floor. "Read it, lawyer." I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, slicing through the room like a freshly sharpened blade. "Since you are so eager to take me to court, you should probably review the discovery files first." Todd blinked, looking down at the binder, then back up at me. Vanessa peered over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Let me save you the billable hours," I said, pacing slowly across the room, owning every inch of the space. "Marcus does not own a network of car dealerships. That business went bankrupt 3 years ago. He ran it straight into the ground with terrible investments and gross mismanagement. He was facing total liquidation and a massive federal tax audit." Vanessa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Marcus refused to look at her. He stared firmly at the floor, the picture of a broken, defeated man. "I saved him!" I continued, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I paid off his creditors. I settled with the IRS. Every single dime that has maintained this fake, flashy, upper-class lifestyle over the last 3 years came directly from my private investment fund. The mortgage for this $4 million mansion, my money. The designer clothes on your back, Vanessa, my money." Todd opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "And let us talk about your prestigious church, Todd," I said, taking a step closer to him, watching the arrogance completely drain from his pale face. "The massive annual donations that Marcus makes in your name. The contributions that secured your position on the church elder board and brought wealthy clients to your struggling law firm. Where do you think that money comes from? It is 100% my charity. I am the invisible breadwinner. I am the one feeding this entire family." The room fell into an absolute suffocating silence. The air felt heavy, thick with the crushing weight of their shattered reality. Vanessa looked at her brother, tears welling in her eyes, waiting for him to deny it. But Marcus said nothing. Todd stared at the financial documents in his hands, his legal threats dissolving into nothingness. They were completely and utterly powerless. Then the silence was shattered by a sharp, cheerful ringtone. Chloe had walked into the office during my speech, her makeup streaked with tears. She was clutching her phone, looking like a ghost. The screen displayed an incoming call from Spelman College. With trembling fingers, she put the phone on speaker, desperate for some semblance of normalcy. "Hello," Chloe whispered, her voice shaking. "Miss Chloe?" A stern, professional woman's voice filled the room. "This is the director of residential life at Spelman. I am calling regarding the cashier's check submitted yesterday for your semester tuition and VIP housing fees." "Yes," Chloe asked, a spark of hope in her eyes. "I am afraid there is a serious issue." The director continued, her tone offering zero sympathy. "The bank just returned the check. It bounced due to insufficient funds. Your account is flagged and your enrollment is suspended." I watched her fall to the floor with absolute detachment. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. For over a year, I had poured my resources, my time, and my energy into providing for this girl, trying to be the supportive figure she needed. I had paid for her designer bags, her exclusive trips, and her premium education. And in return, she had treated me like dirt beneath her shoes. She had proudly declared that she owed me nothing because her father was the one providing everything. It was poetic justice that her beloved father was standing right there, completely unable to save her. Marcus dropped to his knees beside his daughter, trying to comfort her, but she violently shoved his hands away. She looked at him with sheer panic and betrayal, realizing the man she idolized had been lying to her all along. The grand illusion of the powerful, wealthy patriarch had evaporated, leaving nothing but a desperate, broke man sitting on the floor of my house. Chloe scrambled backward away from Marcus as if his sudden poverty was a contagious disease. She stared at the man she had idolized her entire life, realizing he was absolutely powerless. "Do something!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Call the bank! Call the school!" Marcus reached out for her, but his hands were trembling. "Sweetheart, I am going to figure this out. Just give me a minute to talk to Naomi." "No!" Chloe screamed, backing into the heavy oak doorframe. "I do not want you to talk to her. I want you to fix it. My friends are waiting for me at brunch. Fix it right now." As if on cue, Chloe's phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at the screen and let out a horrified gasp. The girls from her elite sorority had already seen the declined transaction for the luxury brunch she was supposed to host. Within 60 seconds, she had been removed from 3 group chats, and her supposed best friend sent a text telling her not to bother showing up. Her entire social hierarchy collapsed in less than a single minute. Chloe slid down the doorframe, burying her face in her hands, weeping uncontrollably. Now she was completely exposed to everyone. Before Marcus could even attempt to comfort his sobbing daughter, his own phone began to ring. It was the sharp, aggressive trill of a priority contact. He glanced at the caller identification and swallowed hard. It was the manager of the exclusive country club. He declined the call. 2 seconds later, the phone rang again. This time it was the private tailor. He declined it again. Then came a call from the luxury car dealership, where he had leased a fleet of vehicles for his fake business operations. Debt collectors and service providers were all receiving the automated messages that the primary account holder had severed ties. The financial dam had broken, and Marcus was drowning in the flood. Vanessa clutched her designer handbag to her chest, her eyes darting nervously. She looked at Todd, who was suddenly very quiet. "Todd? If Marcus is broke?" she whispered, her voice trembling with panic. "How are we going to pay the private school tuition for the kids next month? Marcus always covers that." Todd shushed her, grabbing her arm, but the damage was done. The entire room now fully understood the absolute extent of my power. I was not just Marcus's wife. I was the central pillar holding up their entire universe. Marcus slowly pushed himself off the floor. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and adjusted the collar of his silk pajama shirt. He squared his shoulders and walked toward my desk, leaving his crying daughter and panicked sister behind. He stopped just inches from my mahogany desk. His eyes softened, intentionally shifting into the charming, charismatic persona he had used to win me over 4 years ago. He lowered his voice, adopting a smooth, intimate tone meant only for me. "Naomi, baby, listen to me," he said, resting his hands on the edge of my desk. "I know you are hurt. I know I messed up last night. I was stressed and I took it out on you. But we are a team. We are a powerful black couple building an empire together. You and me against the world, remember. You cannot throw away our marriage over a stupid argument. I love you." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. "I funded your delusions for 3 years because I believed in the vows we took," I said, my voice steady and icy. "I paid your debts, I protected your pride, and I elevated your status because I thought we were partners. But last night you made it very clear where I stand in your hierarchy. You humiliated me in front of your family to protect a spoiled teenager who openly disrespected me." Marcus opened his mouth to interrupt, but I stood up, cutting him off instantly. "You told me she is not my daughter, and I have no right to correct her," I said, repeating his exact words. "And your brother-in-law proudly declared that you are the sole provider who works his fingers to the bone to put a roof over my head. I am simply giving you the opportunity to live up to that title. So go ahead, Marcus, be the provider. Solve your daughter's problems without my money." Marcus stared at me, the charming facade melting away into pure venomous hatred. He realized I was an impenetrable wall. There was no sweet talking his way out of this. "You are going to regret this, Naomi," he hissed, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper. "I am your husband. I have legal rights to this company and this house. You cannot just cut me out and leave me with nothing." I smiled coldly. "Just watch me now." Seeing that Marcus had completely lost control of the situation, Todd stepped forward. The arrogant white lawyer grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and pulled him away from my desk. Todd's eyes darted around my office, taking in the expensive artwork and the high-end computer monitors. A cunning, greedy light flickered in his gaze. "Stop begging her," Marcus, Todd whispered loudly enough for me to hear his tone dripping with newfound malice. "We do not need her permission to take what is yours. She thinks she holds all the winning cards, but she made a massive mistake. I just realized how we can easily and legally seize this entire estate. Let her gloat today. By tomorrow morning, I will show you how to strip her of every single asset she owns. I know the exact legal loophole we need to exploit to drain her accounts completely dry. She is about to learn that playing games with a real lawyer is a fatal error. You will see it soon indeed." The formal legal demand letter arrived at my corporate office at precisely 10 in the morning. My executive assistant placed the heavy cream envelope on my desk with a raised eyebrow. The return address belonged to Todd's second-rate law firm. I used a silver letter opener to break the seal, sliding out 3 pages of absolute legal fiction. Todd had actually drafted a formal notice of intent to sue. The document arrogantly demanded a 50% stake in Obsidian Partners and joint ownership of the Buckhead Mansion. His entire argument hinged on the premise that these assets were acquired or significantly appreciated during the course of the marriage, thereby making them marital property subject to equitable division. He even included a demand for spousal support to maintain Marcus's customary standard of living. I read the document twice, simply because the sheer delusion of it was highly entertaining. Todd actually believed he had found a golden ticket. He thought he could outsmart me in the very arena where I built my empire. I did not even have time to file the letter away before a commotion erupted in the reception area outside my office. Through the frosted glass walls, I could see 3 familiar figures marching past the security desk. Todd was leading the charge, his chest puffed out, barking orders at my front desk staff. Marcus flanked him on the right, looking remarkably confident for a man who could not afford to buy a tank of gas. Vanessa trailed closely behind them, wearing sunglasses indoors, as if she were a celebrity hiding from the paparazzi. My assistant pressed the intercom button, her voice tight with frustration. "Miss Naomi, your husband and his family are here. They are causing quite a disturbance and demanding to see you immediately. Shall I call building security to escort them out?" I pressed the response button. "No, let them in. In fact, be a dear and bring them a fresh pot of coffee. They are going to need something to swallow their pride with." The office doors swung open and Todd strode in as if his name were on the lease. He did not wait for an invitation to sit. He dropped his leather briefcase onto my conference table and stood tall, attempting to project an aura of undeniable authority. He looked around my corner office, taking in the panoramic views of the Atlanta skyline before resting his condescending gaze on me. "I assume you received my letter, Naomi," Todd said, his voice loud enough to carry through the open door to my staff outside. "I suggest you close the door. What we are about to discuss is going to be highly embarrassing for you, and I doubt you want your employees watching your kingdom crumble." I pressed a button under my desk, and the heavy doors slid shut, sealing us inside. I remained seated watching them, with the mild curiosity one might reserve for zoo animals. "You really outdid yourself with this one, Todd," I said, tapping the demand letter. "Claiming 50% of my assets based on marital appreciation. It is almost cute how you try to practice law." Todd slammed his hands down on the desk, leaning over to try and intimidate me. His face was flushed with the arrogant confidence of a mediocre white man who fundamentally believed he was smarter than the black woman sitting across from him. "Do not patronize me," Todd snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "You might be good at making money, but when it comes to the law, you are an absolute amateur. You thought you could just cut off your husband and throw him away, but the law protects the primary breadwinner. You built this company's recent success while married to Marcus. That makes him entitled to half of everything. We can do this the easy way, where you sign over his rightful share, or we can do this the hard way, where I freeze your corporate assets during a prolonged, agonizing divorce trial. Marcus smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. You should listen to him, Naomi. I told you yesterday you cannot just walk away and leave me with nothing. We are partners. Vanessa chimed in, adjusting her designer handbag. Just sign the papers, Naomi. Do not make this uglier than it has to be. You have enough money to share. Stop being so greedy. My assistant walked in carrying a silver tray with a coffee pot and 4 porcelain cups. She set it down quietly and left the room, closing the door behind her. I stood up slowly, walking over to the tray. I poured myself a single cup of black coffee, taking my time. The silence in the room stretched, pulling at their nerves. They expected me to panic, to negotiate, to show fear. My absolute calm was unnerving them. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee. Then I walked over to the modern abstract painting hanging on the far wall. I pressed a hidden panel on the side of the frame, and the artwork swung open, revealing a biometric wall safe. I placed my thumb on the scanner, and the heavy steel door clicked open. I reached inside and pulled out a single manila folder. I walked back to the conference table and dropped the folder right on top of Todd's ridiculous demand letter. You see, Todd? I began pacing slowly around the table. Your entire legal strategy relies on standard marital property laws. But standard laws only apply to standard marriages, and my marriage was a business acquisition. I flipped the folder open. Inside sat our detailed prenuptial agreement. Todd snatched the paperwork. His smug expression vanished as he read the clauses out loud. The contract clearly stated all assets would strictly remain separate. But that was not the worst part for them. I smiled and flipped the heavy parchment to the next page, revealing a massive legally binding loan agreement bearing Marcus's undeniable signature. I watched the last shred of Todd's unwarranted confidence evaporate as his eyes scanned the bold text at the top of the second page. It was a formal promissory note drawn up by one of the most ruthless financial law firms in the state. The sum listed was exactly $5 million. Right below that staggering number was Marcus's distinctive sprawling signature, completely authenticated by a notary public seal. Todd swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he read the stipulations. His hands actually began to tremble. Vanessa leaned over, trying to decipher the legal jargon, but the panic on her husband's face told her everything she needed to know. Let me break it down for you, since your legal expertise seems to be severely lacking, I said, pacing slowly around the large conference table. 3 years ago, Marcus came to me crying. His dealership was millions of dollars in the red. He was facing multiple lawsuits from vendors, and the federal government was preparing to indict him for blatant tax evasion. He begged me to save him so he would not have to go to federal prison and completely embarrass this precious family. I agreed to pay his debts, but I do not hand out charity to grown men. I issued a corporate loan. Marcus stepped forward, his face a mask of desperate denial. Naomi, we are legally married. You cannot possibly enforce that. It was a gift between spouses to build our future together. You said you believed in me. I believed in securing my investments. I corrected him sharply. I do not do simple handshake deals, and I certainly do not gift $5 million to a man who cannot even balance a basic business ledger. That specific document is completely bulletproof. Todd tried to regain his footing, clearing his throat and pointing a shaky finger at the paper. Even with a loan agreement, you cannot claim his future assets. He is absolutely entitled to marital appreciation on this house. I let out a sharp laugh. Read Clause 4, Todd. Read it out loud so your brother-in-law understands exactly what he signed away. Todd looked down at the document, his eyes scanning the dense paragraph. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and incredibly sickly. Allow me, I said, stepping closer and tapping the page. Clause 4 dictates the collateral for the $5 million loan. It states that in the event of default, Obsidian Partners lays claim to 100% of Marcus's corporate shares. Furthermore, it places an ironclad lien on any and all assets he acquires, future income he generates, or properties he attempts to claim, until the debt, plus an aggressive compounded interest rate is paid in full. I turned to look directly into Todd's terrified eyes. He does not own half of my assets, Todd. I own every single thing he touches. I own his business. I own his bank accounts. I legally own him. And since he defaulted on his repayment schedule 6 months ago, I am fully within my rights to liquidate his entire life. The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Marcus staggered backward, bumping into the heavy leather chair as if all the strength had been drained from his legs. The grand illusion of his wealth, his power and his dominance was completely eradicated. He was not a king. He was an indentured servant living in a castle built by his wife. "This is not legal," Marcus stammered, his voice pitching higher with panic. "No judge will uphold this. We share a bed. We share a life. You tricked me into signing that when I was desperate. You had your own independent counsel review it before you signed," I reminded him, pointing to the attorney's signature at the bottom. "The same attorney who warned you it was a harsh deal, but your pride was too big and your desperation was too deep. You chose to sign it because you wanted to keep pretending you were a boss. Well, the boss is collecting her dues today." Todd, realizing he had walked into a legal slaughterhouse, quickly dropped the folder back onto the table. He took a step away from me, his arrogant posture entirely gone. He realized that engaging me in a courtroom would not just result in a loss, it would completely humiliate him and bankrupt his brother-in-law. "Let us go," Marcus Todd muttered, grabbing his briefcase with shaking hands. "We need to regroup and figure out a new strategy. We are not doing this here." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, to scream, to tear the office apart, but the sheer weight of his financial ruin held him firmly in place. Vanessa grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. They looked pathetic, a group of parasites suddenly realizing the host had poisoned the blood supply. As they turned to leave, Todd pulled Marcus into the far corner of my office near the decorative marble columns. He thought they were out of earshot. He thought my assistant and I could not hear them over the ambient noise of the building. He leaned in close, his back to me, completely unaware of his surroundings. Todd lowered his voice to a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. His eyes darted around the room, filled with a new kind of desperate malice. "Listen to me, Marcus," Todd whispered urgently, gripping his brother-in-law by the shoulder. "We cannot beat her with the family law approach. The prenup and the loan are too tight. But she just made a massive mistake showing us her hand. If we cannot take the assets legally, we will just drain the accounts from the inside. I know a guy who handles offshore corporate transfers. You still have your old access codes to the Obsidian network, right?" Marcus nodded slowly, a dark, devious light returning to his eyes. He glanced back at me, his expression shifting from defeat to malicious determination. "Good," Todd continued, his voice barely audible. "We are going to bleed her investment fund dry before she even realizes what hit her. She thinks she won, but we are going to leave her with absolutely nothing." They turned and walked out of my office, pulling the heavy doors shut behind them. They thought they were so clever. They thought their hushed conversation in the corner was completely secret. They fundamentally misunderstood the strict security required to run a highly successful private equity firm. I looked up at the ceiling right above where they had been standing. Tucked discreetly into the ornate crown molding was a high-definition security camera equipped with advanced directional audio recording capabilities. It captured every single syllable of their fraudulent conspiracy in crystal-clear precision. I smiled, turning back to my computer to pull up the footage. They were digging their own graves today. The morning sun felt entirely different today. It was the warmth of absolute vindication. Miles away from my pristine corporate office, Chloe was experiencing a much harsher reality. The director of residential life at Spelman College did not just suspend her enrollment, they demanded she vacate her premium luxury dorm suite immediately. Chloe had to drag 3 oversized Louis Vuitton suitcases down the polished hallway of the honors dormitory with no friends left to help her. Her sorority sisters had already blocked her number. Without her matte black Mercedes, and with her rideshare accounts completely frozen, she had to do something she had never done in her entire privileged life. She had to walk to the nearest public bus stop. My personal cell phone buzzed on my desk. The caller identification showed Chloe's name. I let it ring 3 times before I finally picked up, placing it on speakerphone so I could continue typing an email. "You ruined my life!" Chloe screamed into the receiver. Her voice was shrill, echoing with the ambient noise of city traffic in the background. "I am standing at a bus stop, Naomi." "A bus stop? I have no car and nowhere to go, and my friends are laughing at me. You are an evil, vindictive woman, and I hate you." I paused my typing and leaned toward the microphone. I let her catch her breath before I responded. "Are you finished throwing your tantrum, Chloe?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. "Because you seem to be operating under the delusion that I am somehow responsible for your current situation. Let me give you a severe reality check. When I was 19 years old, I was working 3 different jobs. I scrubbed floors at a diner, I tutored struggling students, and I filed paperwork at a law firm just to pay for my textbooks. I built my empire with my own 2 hands. I gave you the luxury of focusing solely on your education, and you repaid me by calling me a glorified maid. But my dad will fix this," Chloe sobbed, though the arrogant edge was rapidly fading into genuine panic. "He is going to get my car back. Your father cannot even afford to buy you a bus pass right now," I replied coldly. "Welcome to the real world, Chloe. It is time to grow up and get a job." I pressed the end call button and immediately went to her contact profile, blocking her number permanently. I dropped the phone back onto my desk. It did not stay quiet for long. Less than 5 minutes later, my private line rang again. This time it was Vanessa. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I knew she was desperate. I answered the call and was immediately greeted by loud, dramatic sobbing. "Naomi, please, you have to help me," Vanessa cried, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "Todd is completely losing his mind. The credit card companies are calling my house. They are threatening to send my accounts to collections. I have a $10,000 balance at Neiman Marcus, and the payment was due yesterday. You cannot do this to us. We are family." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Vanessa, we are not family. You are simply the sister of a man who owes me $5 million. You cannot turn your back on us like this," Vanessa pleaded, switching tactics. She lowered her voice, trying to sound intimate and culturally bonded. "Naomi, as Black women, we have to stick together. You know how hard it is for us out here. We have to protect Black family loyalty. You cannot let the community see us fall apart. What will people at the church say if Marcus and I lose everything? You have the money to fix this. It is just a drop in the bucket for you." The sheer audacity of her invoking Black family loyalty made me laugh out loud. It was a sharp, humorless sound. "Do not ever try to use our culture as a weapon to manipulate me, Vanessa," I said, my tone dropping into a dangerous warning. "You want to talk about loyalty? Let us talk about loyalty. Let us talk about the country club tea party you hosted last month. You remember that, right? The one I paid for." The line went dead silent. Only Vanessa's shallow breathing echoed through the speaker. "I know exactly what you told the other wives when you thought I was not around." I continued reciting the words that had been reported back to me by a loyal friend. "You said I was too aggressive and too masculine because I worked so much. You said Marcus was a saint for putting up with a woman who had no maternal instincts. You sat there drinking champagne, bought with my money, wearing shoes, bought with my money, and you tore me down to make yourself look superior." "Naomi, I did not mean it like that," Vanessa stammered, her panic escalating. "People were just talking and I got caught up." "You bit the hand that fed you," I interrupted sharply. "You and your arrogant husband thought you could ride my coattails while constantly disrespecting me behind my back. Todd thought his law degree made him untouchable. You thought your social status made you immune to consequences. Tell Todd he better start looking for public defender cases because that Neiman Marcus bill is entirely your problem now." I hung up the phone and blocked her number as well. The purge was liberating. I was systematically severing the infected branches of a dead tree, making sure none of them could ever leech off my success again. The air in my office felt lighter, but the peace was abruptly shattered. The secure emergency intercom on my desk lit up, flashing a bright warning red. A sharp tone pierced the quiet room, demanding my immediate attention. I pressed the button, my instincts instantly sharpening. Yes, Malik. Yes, Malik. I answered, keeping my voice calm and steady. Malik, my chief of cybersecurity, sounded tense. Miss Naomi, we just detected an anomaly in the external firewall. Someone is actively attempting to breach the reserve network using Marcus's old administrative login credentials. They are trying to route funds to an offshore holding account. I sat back in my leather chair. So Todd was not bluffing. He and Marcus had left my office an hour ago whispering about draining my accounts from the inside, and they were already executing their pathetic little heist. Block the transfer, but do not lock them out completely, I instructed Malik. Keep them trapped in the sandbox environment. I need to check something else first. I disconnected the intercom and turned to my secondary monitor. My mind raced back to last night. The disastrous anniversary dinner, the spilled wine, the humiliation. I had walked up the grand staircase to change my ruined silk dress, leaving Marcus, Todd, Vanessa, and Chloe alone in the formal dining room. I assumed they spent the rest of the evening eating my catering and mocking my reaction. But now, realizing the sheer depth of their malicious intent, I needed to know exactly what was said when the breadwinner left the room. I opened the secure surveillance application on my desktop. I had installed hidden high-definition cameras with directional microphones in all the common areas of the Buckhead mansion a year ago, strictly for security purposes after a string of burglaries in our neighborhood. I never used them to spy on my husband. I trusted him. That was my first and most catastrophic mistake. I typed in my encryption key and pulled up the footage from 8 o'clock last night. The screen flickered to life, showing the lavish dining room. I watched my digital self walk out of the frame. The moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind me, the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. Marcus immediately dropped his defensive posture. He leaned back in his custom dining chair, swirling his bourbon, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. He looked at Todd and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Let her storm off and have her little ego trip." Marcus scoffed, his voice clear through the advanced audio feed. "She thinks she is so powerful because she runs a company. But at the end of the day, she is nothing but my personal ATM. She is just a bank account with a pulse." I sat frozen in my office. My chest tightened, a sharp physical ache radiating through my ribs. This was the man who kissed my forehead every morning. The man who promised to protect me. Chloe chimed in, tossing her braids over her shoulder. "She is so annoying, Dad. How much longer do we have to pretend to like her?" "Just be patient, Princess," Marcus replied, taking a slow sip of his expensive drink. "As soon as you finish your degree at Spelman, I am staging a massive blowout. I will file for a divorce claim, emotional distress, and wipe out half of everything she built. We just need to play the game a little longer until your future is completely secured." The dull ache in my chest vanished. It did not fade slowly. It evaporated in a single millisecond, replaced by an arctic absolute coldness. The remaining love I had for this man died right there, looking at a glowing computer screen. Todd leaned forward, his elbows resting on my expensive linen tablecloth. The mediocre white lawyer had a gleam of pure greed in his pale eyes. "Why wait that long?" Marcus, Todd whispered, his tone dripping with sleazy confidence. "You do not need to wait for a divorce settlement to get paid. She has millions tied up in commercial real estate across Midtown. You have access to her corporate seals. Bring me the property deeds. I will personally forge her signature as the official notary, and we can take out massive secret secondary mortgages against her properties. We can pull $10 million in cash before she even notices a single discrepancy." Marcus smiled, raising his glass toward Todd in a silent toast. "I like the way you think, counselor. We will start moving the pieces on Monday morning." I paused the video. The frame froze on Marcus's smiling, treacherous face. This was not just an arrogant family taking advantage of a successful black woman. This was not just a case of bruised egos or ungrateful stepchildren. This was a highly coordinated, malicious criminal conspiracy. They were actively plotting to steal my life's work, drain my resources, and leave me completely destitute while they rode off into the sunset. They viewed my generosity as weakness and my love as a vulnerability to be exploited. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the icy realization harden my absolute resolve. They wanted to play a game of deception and financial ruin. They had no idea they had just challenged the ultimate grandmaster. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Malik," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Yes, Miss Naomi. They are still trying to bypass the secondary firewall. Should I contact the federal authorities now? We have clear evidence of attempted wire fraud." "No," I replied, my eyes still fixed on Marcus's frozen face on the monitor. "Do not call the police. That is far too easy. I want to play a much bigger game. What do you need me to do?" "Open a backdoor in this isolated sandbox network," I ordered. "Create a ghost account that looks exactly like the primary corporate reserve fund. Fill it with a digital illusion of exactly $10 million. Drop all the advanced security protocols on that specific node and let them break right in. I want Marcus and Todd to think they successfully hacked the system. I want them to firmly believe they just struck absolute gold. Let the rats walk into the trap." My new husband's teenage daughter ruined my custom silk dress in front of his entire family and called me a maid. When I turned to my husband for support, he slammed his fist on the table and told me to know my place. His arrogant brother-in-law chimed in, telling me to be grateful for the roof over my head. I did not scream or cry. I simply smiled and agreed. They had no idea that by 8 o'clock the next morning, every luxury car bank account and college tuition check they relied on would vanish. Let me tell you how I dismantled their fake empire overnight. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic people who completely underestimated your true worth. My name is Naomi, and I am 38 years old. I built a private equity empire from the ground up, but to the people sitting around my dining table, I was just a lucky woman who managed to secure a wealthy husband. We were celebrating our 1-year anniversary in our Buckhead estate. The room was bathed in the warm ambient glow of the fireplace, illuminating contemporary art pieces I had carefully curated to celebrate Black excellence. Instead, it became the exact moment the illusion of my perfect marriage shattered completely. Marcus, my 45-year-old husband, sat at the head of the table. He played the role of the ultimate provider, supposedly carrying the entire family on his broad shoulders. To his right sat his 19-year-old daughter, Chloe. She had spent the entire evening rolling her eyes, texting on her phone, and making passive-aggressive sighs whenever Marcus reached over to hold my hand. The tension finally snapped during the main course. I was wearing a custom white silk dress I had commissioned specifically for this anniversary. As the private chef cleared the salad plates, Chloe suddenly reached across the table for the salt shaker. She did not ask anyone to pass it. Instead, her arm knocked directly into my crystal glass of vintage red wine. I watched in slow motion as the dark crimson liquid cascaded over the rim, splashing directly onto my lap, and completely ruining the pristine white silk. I gasped instinctively, pushing my chair back as the cold wine soaked through the fabric. The entire table fell dead silent. I looked up at Chloe, expecting at least a feigned look of surprise or a muttered apology. Instead, she sat back, crossed her arms, and stared at me with a smirk so deeply malicious it made my blood run cold. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the shock vibrating through my chest. "An apology would be appropriate right now." She scoffed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed in the quiet room. "I am not apologizing to a gold digger." She flipped her perfectly styled braids over her shoulder and looked around the table to ensure everyone was listening. "My dad bought this house. He bought the food on this table, and he definitely paid for that dress you are wearing. You are not my mother. You are just a glorified maid who managed to secure a ring." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I slowly turned my gaze to Marcus, fully expecting him to demand respect for his wife, to discipline the spoiled teenager sitting beside him. I waited for the man I married to stand up and defend me. Instead, Marcus deliberately set his wine glass down with a heavy thud. He did not look at his daughter. His eyes, burning with sudden, inexplicable anger, locked directly onto mine. "She is not your daughter, Naomi," he growled, his voice vibrating with warning. Do not ever raise your voice to teach her a lesson in this house. You are the one making a massive deal out of absolutely nothing. It was an accident. Go upstairs and change if it bothers you that much, but stop ruining the mood. I felt the floor drop out from underneath me. It was not just the defense of her terrible behavior, it was the public humiliation, the blatant disregard for my dignity in front of his entire family. But before I could even process the magnitude of his betrayal, another voice chimed in. Come on, Naomi. It was Todd, the 40-year-old white husband of Marcus's sister, Vanessa. Todd was an arrogant, mediocre lawyer who constantly overcompensated by inserting himself into family business. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon with a patronizing grin that made my stomach turn. Do not act like an angry black woman on Marcus's special anniversary. The man works his fingers to the bone to feed this family and keep a roof over your head. You really should know your place, be grateful for what you have, and just leave the poor girl alone. The deeply ingrained prejudice and sheer delusion in Todd's words were breathtaking. They honestly believed this narrative. They had convinced themselves that Marcus was the wealthy king of the castle, and I was merely a destitute woman lucky enough to be brought along for the ride. In that fraction of a second, any lingering affection I had for this family evaporated. I did not cry, I did not scream, I did not give Todd the satisfaction of fulfilling his racist stereotype. Instead, I calmly picked up my linen napkin and dabbed at the ruined silk. I looked at the three people who had just cemented their own downfall. I smiled a slow, chilling smile. Fine, I said. I will not interfere with how you spoil your daughter Marcus. But tomorrow you will all learn the absolute, unvarnished, ultimate truth about who really holds the power in this house. The scent of cheap frying oil is difficult to wash out of synthetic fabrics. Chloe discovered this reality during her third shift at a fast food franchise. Without her luxury vehicle to shield her, she was forced to take the only job that hired on the spot. Her manicured hands were blistered from harsh cleaning chemicals, and her designer sneakers were ruined by a thick layer of kitchen grease. After dropping a tray of lukewarm fries and being aggressively reprimanded by a shift manager, Chloe finally snapped. She ripped off her polyester visor, threw it onto the linoleum floor, and stormed out of the restaurant. In her delusional mind, she believed that if she demanded I act like a real mother, I would apologize and restore her lifestyle. My security desk alerted me the moment she walked into the marble lobby. I instructed the guards to let her take the private elevator up. My office doors swung open and Chloe marched in. She smelled distinctly of burnt cooking oil and desperation, yet she tried to hold her chin high, wearing the unearned arrogance of a billionaire's daughter. Naomi, we need to talk right now, Chloe demanded, dropping her canvas tote bag onto my guest chair. I am working at a drive-thru. People I went to private school with are laughing at me. You need to unlock my accounts and reinstate my housing. I let her voice echo in the room, letting the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably on her feet. You took a vow to be part of this family. Chloe continued, her voice taking on a whining pitch. That means you are supposed to be a mother to me. You are supposed to guide me and provide for me. You owe me that much. I hit send on my email and looked up at her. I owe you maternal guidance, I repeated, my voice deadly calm. Let us see exactly what kind of relationship we established. I picked up a remote control and aimed it at the flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying clear security footage from the formal dining room on the night of my anniversary dinner. On the screen, the digital version of Chloe sneered. I am not apologizing to a gold digger. My dad bought this house. He paid for that dress you are wearing. You are not my mother. You are just a maid. I paused the video right on her malicious smirk. I turned back to look at the real Chloe, whose face had suddenly drained of all color. You made the rules clear that night, I said, resting my forearms on the desk. You declared I was not your mother, and you established that I was nothing more than a maid. I am simply respecting your boundaries. I do not provide maternal care or unlimited cards to people who treat me like dirt. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a folded bundle of thick gray fabric. I tossed it across the desk. It landed heavily right in front of her. What is this? Chloe stammered, staring at the bundle. It is a commercial janitorial uniform, I replied smoothly. Since you hate smelling like French fries, I decided to offer you an internal corporate transfer. Obsidian Partners is looking for someone to scrub the toilets on the 4th level. The pay is $15 an hour. If you want my money, you are going to earn it like the maid you think I am. Take the job or walk out of my building. Chloe grabbed the fabric, let out a scream, and hurled it across the room. You are an evil woman, she shrieked, tears of defeat streaming down her face. My dad is going to take everything you own. She spun around and ran out of my office, sobbing hysterically. As she fled toward the elevators, she frantically dialed her father's number. I pulled up my security interface to listen to the intercepted audio feed. Dad, Chloe sobbed into her phone. You have to do something. She humiliated me. You have to fix this right now. On the other end of the line, Marcus did not offer a single word of comfort. His voice was entirely devoid of paternal warmth. Chloe, stop crying and listen to me, Marcus snapped. I do not have time for your teenage drama right now. Todd and I are in the middle of executing a massive business deal that is going to save all of us. Stop bothering me and figure it out yourself. The line went dead. Chloe was left completely abandoned by the very man she believed would conquer the world for her. While Chloe wept in the elevator, my surveillance software shifted its focus to a different target. Miles away inside a rented office space in Midtown Atlanta, Todd was sealing his own permanent destruction. Through a compromised webcam on his laptop, I watched the arrogant lawyer hunched over his wooden desk. He was sweating profusely as he carefully aligned a stack of forged legal documents. These were the exact papers required to secure the $10 million bridge loan from Vanguard Trust. Todd picked up his official notary stamp. He did not hesitate. He pressed the heavy metal seal down onto the signature line, falsely authenticating a fabricated federal infrastructure contract. He stamped page after page, consumed by the illusion of imminent wealth. He firmly believed his legal degree made him untouchable. He grabbed his phone and texted Marcus. The collateral package is fully notarized and verified. I am submitting the application to the investment bank right now. We are about to be rich. I sat in my office and smiled. Todd had used his legal credentials to commit federal wire fraud and corporate espionage. He thought he was signing paperwork to steal my empire. He had no idea he had just proudly signed his own irrevocable death warrant. The morning after Todd submitted his fraudulent loan application, he woke up feeling invincible. He believed he had executed the perfect crime, successfully outsmarting a powerful black woman. His fragile ego demanded that he gloat. He needed to look me in the eye and assert his dominance one last time. My security desk notified me of his arrival just before lunch. He pushed past my assistant and strutted straight into my office like he owned it. Todd slapped a thick stack of legal documents down onto my marble desk. You have been served, Naomi, he announced, a predatory smile stretching across his pale face. I did not flinch. What exactly is this, Todd? I asked, my voice perfectly calm. It is a subpoena, he replied, puffing out his chest. I am representing Marcus in a civil dispute regarding the emotional distress you intentionally inflicted upon his daughter. I suggest you get your legal team ready, because I am going to bury you. I looked down at the subpoena. It was a frivolous lawsuit, a pathetic smokescreen designed to distract me so I would not notice him draining $10 million from my reserves. Todd leaned over my desk, adopting a deeply patronizing tone. You know, Naomi, you women get a little taste of success and suddenly think you are untouchable. His words dripped with a toxic blend of sexism and racial superiority. You think you can play with the big boys, but the legal system is complex. People like you always crumble when you face real structural pressure. I let him bask in his imaginary victory. Then I reached forward and pushed the subpoena off the edge of my desk. The papers fluttered uselessly to the floor. Lawyer Todd, I said, leaning back, you really should focus your energy on your failing law practice instead of barking here. His face flushed a deep, angry red. My practice is highly successful, he snapped. I bill at a premium rate. You bill out of a rented suite on the 12th floor of the Sovereign building in Midtown, I corrected him. The rent must be astronomical for a mediocre attorney who relies on his brother-in-law's fake charity to stay afloat. Todd narrowed his eyes. What does my office space have to do with anything? I smiled, picked up my desk phone, and pressed a button on speed dial. I put the call on speaker so the audio broadcast clearly through my office. The Sovereign Management Office. This is Richard speaking. Good morning, Richard, I said, keeping my eyes locked onto Todd's increasingly nervous face. This is Naomi. Miss Naomi, Richard replied, his tone instantly shifting into deep reverence. What can I do for the building owner today? I watched the color completely drain from Todd's face. His mouth fell slightly open as the word owner echoed in the quiet room. He took a stumbling step back, his legs suddenly looking very weak. He had absolutely no idea that Obsidian Partners held the primary deed to that prestigious commercial real estate building. Richard I continued, never breaking eye contact with Todd. I need you to execute an immediate commercial eviction for the law firm leasing suite 1200. Todd gasped, stepping forward and slamming his hand on the desk. You cannot do that. I have an ironclad lease. An immediate eviction, Miss Naomi? Richard asked, remaining perfectly professional. Shall I cite a specific breach of contract for the termination notice? Yes, please cite a gross violation of the ethical conduct clause, I instructed smoothly. My cybersecurity team conducted a routine audit of the building's network infrastructure this morning. We discovered that Suite 1200 is actively utilizing stolen and pirated legal software across all their local servers. They are operating a fraudulent enterprise on my property. Terminate their lease immediately and deactivate their building access keycards by 5 o'clock today. They have exactly 24 hours to pack up their stolen software and vacate my property entirely. Consider it done immediately, Miss Naomi, Richard said before disconnecting the line. The silence that followed was suffocating. Todd stood there completely paralyzed as the reality of his situation crushed him. I had just annihilated his professional workspace with a single phone call. He was about to be thrown out onto the street in front of all his wealthy corporate neighbors. You have 24 hours, Todd, I whispered, leaning forward. I suggest you stop wasting time trying to sue me and start finding some cardboard boxes. Something inside Todd completely snapped. The fragile white ego he had meticulously built over his entire life shattered into jagged pieces. The realization that a black woman held absolute total control over his existence drove him into a blind, feral rage. You worthless animal! Todd screamed, a guttural sound tearing from his throat. He lunged across my marble desk. His hands reached out violently, his fingers curled into claws aiming directly for my throat. He knocked over my computer monitor, sending it crashing to the floor. He wanted to physically destroy the woman who had just dismantled his world. But I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. Before Todd's hands could brush the fabric of my blazer, the heavy oak doors of my office burst open. Two massive, highly trained security guards, who had been standing just outside the door waiting for my signal, surged into the room. The first guard grabbed Todd by the back of his expensive suit collar, yanking him violently backward off my desk. The second guard secured Todd's arms, twisting them sharply behind his back. Todd thrashed and kicked screaming profanities, his face purple with uncontrollable fury. "Let me go," he roared. "I am a lawyer. I will sue all of you." The guards did not speak. They lifted Todd entirely off the ground by his neck and his belt. They marched him backward toward the exit, carrying him like a rabid feral dog. He was completely ruined. Despite being physically thrown out of his law firm, Todd refused to accept defeat. His bruised ego combined with his desperation morphed into a reckless delusion. He dusted off his expensive suit, met up with Marcus, and convinced his brother-in-law that their financial salvation was within reach. They had the forged federal infrastructure contract. They had my fabricated signature. They had Todd's official, albeit compromised, notary seal. In their minds, this $10 million loan was the ultimate equalizer. They marched into this downtown branch of Vanguard Trust on Tuesday morning. Marcus wore his tailored suit, projecting the false aura of a highly successful entrepreneur, while Todd stood by his side playing the role of legal counsel. They sat across from the senior loan director, a man named Julian. They handed over the thick manila envelope containing the fraudulent collateral package. Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. He unleashed his signature charisma, flashing a smile that hid his desperation. As you can see, Julian Marcus said smoothly, my wife and I are securing a massive federal contract. Obsidian Partners is expanding and we need a $10 million bridge loan to cover operational costs until the government funds disperse next month. Todd nodded sharply, tapping the forged documents. Everything is fully authenticated and notarized by my firm. The collateral is bulletproof. We expect a rapid turnaround on the underwriting process. Julian opened the folder. He adjusted his glasses and spent several minutes carefully reviewing the paperwork. He examined the fake signatures, the fabricated government seals, and the aggressive loan terms Marcus was eagerly agreeing to. Julian did not blink. He did not ask probing questions. He did not show a single hint of suspicion. Julian was a highly paid executive directly employed by Obsidian Partners. I had briefed him thoroughly the night before. He knew exactly who was sitting in his office, and he knew exactly what to do with the rats that walked into the trap. Julian closed the folder and smiled warmly. This all looks perfectly in order, gentlemen, Julian said, extending his hand across the desk. Given the ironclad nature of this federal contract and the pristine reputation of Obsidian Partners, I am authorizing an expedited approval. We will bypass the holding period. The $10 million will be fully dispersed and available in your designated holding account by 8 o'clock this Friday evening. Marcus let out a breath he had been holding for days. He shook Julian's hand vigorously, his eyes lighting up with unadulterated greed. Todd smirked, a triumphant look washing over his face as he believed his legal mind had secured their ultimate victory. Friday evening was not just a random date. Friday evening was the highly anticipated Atlanta Black Excellence Gala. It was the absolute pinnacle of the city's high society social season, gathering the most influential business leaders, politicians, and cultural icons under one roof. Marcus walked out of Vanguard Trust feeling like a god. The reality of his bankrupt dealership, his frozen accounts, and his daughter's humiliating eviction vanished from his mind. In his head, he was a multimillionaire once again. He firmly believed he had outsmarted me and secured his financial independence. He needed to celebrate. He needed to make a statement. Marcus drove to an exclusive boutique in Buckhead. Using a high-interest payday credit card he had secretly opened years ago, he purchased a $5,000 custom velvet tuxedo. He wanted to walk into that gala looking like royalty. But Marcus did not just want to show off his imaginary wealth. He wanted absolute revenge. He wanted to systematically destroy my reputation in front of the exact people who respected me. For the next 3 days, Marcus locked himself in the guest bedroom, completely ignoring the mounting collection notices piling up in the mailbox. He spent hours pacing the floor, practicing a highly manipulative, malicious speech. He planned to take the microphone at the gala during the open toast segment. He was going to stand in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta and paint himself as a devoted, loving husband enduring a private tragedy. I listened to his rehearsals through the hidden security cameras. Marcus had crafted a narrative where I was suffering from severe mental illness. He practiced crying, claiming the pressure of running a corporation had caused me to suffer a complete psychological breakdown. He was going to tell the elite crowd my sudden cruelty toward his accounts and his daughter were symptoms of a tragic mental collapse. He wanted to weaponize my success, making it look like it drove me insane. He planned to steal my money and farm their sympathy simultaneously, positioning himself as the noble savior taking over the business to protect his sick wife. He was so incredibly proud of his twisted little script. He thought he was walking into a coronation. He had absolutely no idea he was marching directly into a public execution. Friday evening finally arrived. The city was buzzing with anticipation for the grand event. I stood silently in the center of my master closet, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling mirrors. The soft lighting illuminated the custom evening gown I had selected for the night. It was a stunning architectural masterpiece crafted from heavy silk the color of deep, rich wine. The fabric draped perfectly, wrapping around me like royal armor. My stylist secured the final diamond clasp at the nape of my neck and stepped back silently, leaving me alone in the reflection. I traced the bold neckline of the burgundy dress, letting the cool silk settle against my skin. I looked directly into my own eyes in the mirror. I was not the victim of a fake marriage. I was not a stepping stone for an arrogant man and his ungrateful family. I was the master of the board. I picked up my diamond clutch, taking one last look at my reflection. Tonight, the curtain falls. The Atlanta Black Excellence Gala was the crown jewel of the social calendar. Hosted in a historic hotel, it was a dazzling display of wealth and absolute influence. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over prominent Black entrepreneurs, politicians, and cultural icons. Flashbulbs illuminated the red carpet, capturing the arrival of the elite. Waiters circulated with vintage champagne, while a live jazz ensemble filled the massive cavernous room with incredibly smooth evening melodies. Marcus confidently walked through the double doors, feeling like an absolute king. He proudly wore his brand-new custom velvet tuxedo, completely ignoring the harsh reality that it was purchased on a high-interest credit card. He walked with his chest puffed out, drinking in the admiring glances of the crowd. He firmly believed that $10 million of federal loan money was quietly settling into his holding account. He felt completely untouchable and invincible. Flanking him were his sister Vanessa and her husband Todd. Vanessa wore an emerald gown she could not afford, clinging to his arm as if his imaginary wealth would shield her from her own debts. Todd walked with an arrogant swagger, relishing the opportunity to rub shoulders with billionaires. They were three desperate parasites, masquerading as royalty, soaking up the glory of a lifestyle they had tried to steal. I finally arrived exactly 20 minutes later. I calmly stepped out of my private town car, and the crisp evening air brushed against my face. My burgundy silk gown flowed perfectly as I walked up. I did not bring an entourage. I did not need an entourage. Power does not require an audience to validate its existence. As I entered the main foyer, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The influential people in that room recognized me not as someone's wife, but as a titan of the financial sector. Marcus spotted me immediately from across the crowded room. I watched his eyes narrow as a malicious, predatory gleam washed over his face. This was the moment he had practiced in the guest bedroom. He nudged Todd and Vanessa, gesturing excitedly in my direction. They moved together as a unified front, cutting through the crowd to intercept me right in the dead center of the lobby. They wanted an audience. They wanted a public execution. Marcus stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop. A circle of highly influential people naturally formed around us, their curiosity piqued by the sudden tension. Marcus let out a heavy theatrical sigh. He arranged his face into a mask of deep, agonizing paternal concern. Naomi, he said, his voice projecting loudly enough to ensure the surrounding politicians and chief executive officers could hear every single word. "What are you doing here, baby? I know your nerves have been incredibly unstable lately." I simply looked at him, letting him dig his grave deeper. "You have been under so much pressure at work, and it is clearly breaking your mind," Marcus continued, shaking his head with fake pity. "You completely cut off the bank accounts for our teenage daughter. You spitefully kicked your own brother-in-law out today. You are spiraling, Naomi. You are having a complete psychological breakdown. Please, baby, let me take you home so you can rest. I will take over the business operations until you get the psychiatric help you desperately need. I forgive you for all the crazy things you have done this week." Murmurs rippled through the surrounding crowd. Whispers of shock and concern passed between the wealthy guests. Marcus was trying to strip me of my credibility, painting me as a hysterical, mentally fragile woman who needed her capable husband now. Todd eagerly stepped into the spotlight, seizing the opportunity to exert his unearned authority. He gave me a condescending, pitying look that made my blood run ice cold. "She really needs to see a specialized psychiatrist," Marcus Todd added, his voice dripping with fake professional concern. "It is tragic to see what happens when these women try to handle too much corporate pressure." "Do not take her erratic behavior personally, Marcus. Do not mind a woman who is so clearly losing her mind and completely losing her emotional control tonight. Vanessa placed a dramatic hand over her heart, looking around at the audience to ensure they were buying the performance. We just want to get her into a good mental health facility, she chimed in. We love her, and we just want her to get better. They stood there in their unpaid designer clothes waiting for me to react. They expected me to scream. They expected me to cry. They expected me to fulfill the exact stereotype they had just built for the crowd, the angry, unhinged woman throwing tantrums. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I did not even frown. I looked at Marcus, Todd, and Vanessa with absolute chilling serenity. "Excuse me," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and entirely undisturbed. I stepped gracefully around Marcus, leaving him standing there with his fake concern hanging uselessly in the air. I walked straight through the parted crowd, my burgundy silk dress sweeping across the marble floor. I glided past the whispering executives and the confused politicians directly into the main grand ballroom. As I crossed the threshold, the sharp feedback of a microphone tapping echoed through the speaker system. The room fell into silence. The master of ceremonies stood at the podium under a spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we must honor the visionary leader who made this gala possible. Please direct your attention to the main stage to welcome our ultimate diamond sponsor." I did not stop walking. I ascended the stage steps. The spotlight swung over, hitting me perfectly. Every camera pivoted toward me. Hundreds stared in absolute awe. Marcus, Todd, and Vanessa followed me into the ballroom, and I watched their smug smiles evaporate as I stepped up to the podium and firmly grasped the microphone. I looked out over the sea of faces in the grand ballroom. Hundreds of the most influential people in Atlanta stared back at me in absolute silence. The crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant glow over the crowd, but my focus remained razor sharp. I adjusted the microphone, letting the quiet anticipation stretch for just a moment longer. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady and resonant, echoing across the massive room. "It is a profound honor to stand before you tonight as the diamond sponsor of the Atlanta Black Excellence Gala. We are gathered here to celebrate the incredible achievements of our community and the trailblazers who have built empires from the ground up." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the front row. I easily spotted Marcus. He was standing near the VIP tables, his jaw tightly clenched, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and mounting dread. Todd and Vanessa stood right behind him, looking completely paralyzed. They had expected me to be escorted out by security for a mental breakdown. Instead, I was commanding the entire room. At Obsidian Partners, we believe that true power comes from lifting others up. I continued pacing my delivery perfectly. That is why tonight I am incredibly proud to announce our newest initiative. Obsidian Partners is officially pledging a $5 million grant to support and fund aspiring Black female entrepreneurs across the state of Georgia. The ballroom erupted. The applause was deafening, a thunderous wave of genuine appreciation and respect. Distinguished guests rose to their feet, cheering and raising their champagne glasses in my direction. I smiled graciously, nodding to the crowd, but my peripheral vision remained locked on my husband. Marcus looked like he was going to be physically sick. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a pale, ashen shade. He watched the wealthiest people in the city give his wife a standing ovation. The realization that I was the ultimate power broker in that room was hitting him like a freight train. Yet even as he watched me bask in the glory, I could see the desperate wheels turning in his head. He subtly adjusted his velvet tuxedo jacket, pulling his shoulders back. He leaned over and whispered something to Todd. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was comforting himself with his delusion. He was reminding himself that tomorrow morning he was going to wake up with $10 million safely transferred into his private offshore holding account. He firmly believed his fraudulent bridge loan from Vanguard Trust was his ultimate safety net. I raised my hand gently, signaling the crowd to settle down. The applause slowly faded, transitioning back into an eager, attentive silence. "Thank you," I said, leaning closer to the microphone. But tonight is not just about celebrating our financial achievements. It is also about protecting the integrity of our community. True excellence requires absolute transparency and rigid accountability. We must actively guard our businesses against corruption. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The celebratory mood cooled, replaced by a sharp, crackling tension. Experienced business leaders leaned forward, sensing the sudden drop in temperature. I locked eyes directly with Marcus. He stopped whispering to Todd. His posture went completely rigid. "I want to take this opportunity to talk about honesty in business," I said, my voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone. "We work incredibly hard to build our legacies. We sacrifice our time, our energy, and our resources to create generational wealth. But unfortunately, there are parasites among us who prefer to take the easy way out. There are individuals who will eagerly use the name of their family, their spouse, or their community to commit blatant, undeniable fraud." A collective gasp rippled through the front rows. People began glancing around, trying to figure out who I was talking about. Marcus took a stumbling step backward, bumping into Vanessa. His eyes darted toward the exit doors, but the crowd was packed too tightly around him. He was trapped right in the center of the room. "Some people believe that a charming smile and a tailored suit can hide a thief," I continued, never breaking my intense stare with my husband. "They believe they can forge signatures, manipulate banking institutions, and steal millions of dollars from the very people who feed them. They think they are the smartest people in the room simply because they have never faced a real consequence in their entire lives." Todd suddenly grabbed Marcus tightly by the arm. The mediocre white lawyer had finally realized what was happening. His arrogant facade shattered entirely, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. He tried to pull Marcus toward the side aisle, but my security team had already quietly positioned themselves, blocking every possible exit route. "Tonight we are going to set a very clear example," I announced, my voice echoing with finality. "We are going to show everyone exactly what happens when you try to steal from Obsidian Partners." I reached into my pocket and pressed a small remote trigger. The massive digital screen behind me, which had been proudly displaying the sparkling gold logo of the gala, went completely black. A second later, a bright, high-definition image flashed onto the giant display. It was massive, towering over 20 feet tall for the entire ballroom to see. It was not just a logo. It was a crystal-clear scanned photograph of a legal contract. The crowd murmured in confusion as they squinted to read the glowing text, but the people in the front row gasped in pure horror. Displayed on the enormous screen was the exact $10 million bridge loan application from Vanguard Trust. I had highlighted the bottom of the document in bright red. There, projected for the most influential people in Atlanta to witness, was my clearly forged signature sitting right next to the verified legal notary seal belonging directly to the lawyer Todd. A collective gasp rippled through the massive ballroom as the enormous high-definition screen illuminated the undeniable proof of their crime. The glowing projection of the $10 million bridge loan application loomed over the entire gala, displaying my blatantly forged signature right next to the verified legal notary seal belonging to Todd. Hundreds of prominent executives, politicians, and cultural icons stared in absolute horror at the document. The elite society of Atlanta, known for their impeccable composure, completely lost their collective restraint. Whispers morphed into loud, shocked murmurs. Marcus stood frozen, his custom velvet tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap theatrical costume. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking physically hollow. Todd took a stumbling step backward, his eyes wide with a frantic, terrified realization. I held the microphone firmly, my posture radiating absolute, unshakable authority. I looked down at the men who had plotted to steal all my hard work. "Marcus," I said, my voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the ballroom like a sharpened blade, "did you honestly believe you could simply bypass my security protocols to borrow $10 million from Vanguard Trust? Did you really think you could use a fabricated federal infrastructure contract to finance your pathetic escape plan without me knowing every single detail?" Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was too dry to form words. He looked around wildly, seeking an escape route, but the wealthy guests had instinctively stepped back, forming a tight, inescapable circle around him and his accomplices. Let me educate you on the true scope of the empire you tried to dismantle. I continued, my tone dropping into a deadly calm cadence. You see, Marcus, it is a terrible tragedy that you never bothered to read the quarterly financial reports I left on my desk. If you had paid attention instead of focusing on your own fragile ego, you would have known that Obsidian Partners fully acquired Vanguard Trust last month. They are a direct subsidiary of my holding company. The silence that fell over the room was heavy and suffocating. I watched the absolute devastation wash over the face of my husband as the reality of his situation finally breached his thick skull. I personally reviewed your fraudulent loan application this morning, I announced, echoing my words across the grand hall, and you will be thrilled to know that your loan was technically approved. The $10 million was fully disbursed at exactly 5 o'clock this evening, just as Julian promised you. However, the funds were not deposited into your secret offshore holding account. The money was routed directly into a secure frozen account monitored by federal investigators. Marcus let out a guttural sound of pure panic. He frantically pushed against the heavy wooden chair beside him, his breathing erratic and shallow. He grabbed Vanessa by the arm, attempting to shove his way through the dense crowd of onlookers. "Move!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Let us through right now." But nobody moved. The influential leaders of Atlanta stood their ground, staring at him with unvarnished disgust. He was completely boxed in, trapped in the center of the room he had planned to conquer. Vanessa began to scream. Her emerald gown tangled around her legs as she stumbled backward, gripping the suit jacket of Todd with trembling hands. "Todd, what is she talking about?" Vanessa shrieked, tears of panic ruining her expensive makeup. "Tell them she is lying. Tell them we did not do anything wrong. What is happening to us?" Todd puffed out his chest, desperately trying to summon the arrogant superiority he had wielded in my office just days prior. He pointed a shaking finger at me, attempting to project an authority he no longer possessed. "This is a massive setup!" Todd yelled, his voice echoing shrilly across the ballroom. "This is blatant defamation and slander. You fabricated that document on the screen to ruin us. I am a licensed attorney. I have legal immunity from these ridiculous accusations. You cannot do this to me. I will sue you and every single person in this room who tries to stop me. I am a lawyer." I smiled, letting him hang himself with his own desperate lies. Before I could even respond, a distinguished gentleman stepped out from the front row of the very important person tables. It was Harrison Vance, a highly respected federal judge, and the current acting president of the Georgia Bar Association. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and walked deliberately toward Todd. The crowd parted respectfully to let the honorable man pass. Mr. Vance stopped just a few feet away from the trembling lawyer. He looked at Todd with a mixture of professional disdain and profound disappointment. "You are no longer a licensed attorney, Todd," Mr. Vance said, his voice carrying the heavy absolute weight of the law. "You do not possess legal immunity, and you certainly do not possess any authority to threaten anyone in this room." Todd froze, his hands dropping to his sides. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. The State Disciplinary Board held an emergency ethics hearing this afternoon. Mr. Vance continued, projecting his voice so the entire gala could hear the verdict. "We reviewed the extensive, irrefutable evidence of your corporate espionage, your unauthorized software piracy, and your direct involvement in attempting to defraud a major financial institution. As of 5 o'clock this evening, your license to practice law in the state of Georgia has been permanently revoked. You have been completely disbarred." His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the marble floor, his arrogance completely obliterated. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a sob. Vanessa dropped beside him, weeping hysterically. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the giant screen displaying his failure. Suddenly, blinding flashes of press cameras erupted, illuminating their absolute ruin. Outside the glass doors, the dark Atlanta night was pierced by the glow of red and blue police lights. The blinding flashes of the press cameras were eclipsed by the harsh strobe of red and blue lights reflecting through the massive windows of the grand ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance did not just open, they were pushed apart with coordinated force. The lively murmurs of the elite crowd died down, replaced by an absolute breathless silence as a dozen federal agents and the police chief marched into the venue. They wore dark, tactical windbreakers with FBI emblazoned across their backs. They moved with a synchronized purpose, cutting straight through the sea of terrified politicians and wealthy business executives. They were marching directly toward Marcus. Marcus stumbled backward, his designer velvet tuxedo suddenly looking like a cheap straitjacket. He threw his hands up in a frantic gesture of surrender before anyone even touched him. The lead federal agent stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of warrants from his jacket. Marcus Julian Vance, the agent, announced, his voice booming over the silence of the hall. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, massive corporate forgery, and conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately. No! Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking into a high wail. There is a misunderstanding. I am a wealthy man. I am a business owner. My wife is just angry with me. She set me up. Naomi, tell them. Tell them this is a huge mistake. I stood on the stage looking down at him with an expression of pure ice. I did not say a single word. The federal agents did not care about his lies. They grabbed him by the shoulders, spun him around, and slammed him against the VIP table. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed like a gunshot in the room. Todd tried to slowly back away into the crowd, attempting to use the chaos to slip out and exit. He held his hands up, adopting a posture of total innocence. I am just his legal representation, Todd stammered, his face glistening with sweat. I had absolutely no idea the documents were fabricated. I am a victim here too. I was completely manipulated by my brother-in-law. A second FBI agent stepped directly into Todd's path, blocking his escape. We have hours of audio recordings from a hidden security camera detailing your exact step-by-step plan to forge the corporate seals, the agent stated coldly. We also have the digital footprint of your software and the notary logs you falsified. Todd William Miller, you are also under arrest for federal conspiracy, wire fraud, and abuse of legal trust. Todd let out a guttural sob as the agents twisted his arms behind his back and secured the handcuffs. The arrogant, mediocre white lawyer who had strutted into my office just days ago, demanding half my empire, was now crying like a child in front of the entire Atlanta high society. Vanessa could not handle the destruction of her fake reality. Her knees buckled beneath her. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, her emerald green gown bunching up around her waist. Her perfectly styled hair fell out of place as she began to weep. She scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees, ignoring the shocked stares of the billionaires surrounding her. She grabbed the bottom edge of the stage by my feet. Naomi, please! Vanessa wailed, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. You cannot do this to us. Marcus is your husband. Todd is the father of my children. Please call off the authorities. Tell them you will drop the charges. We are a family. Black family loyalty means we have to stick together and protect our men from the system. You have to save them, Naomi. I am begging you. I slowly walked down the stage steps until I was standing right in front of her. I looked down at the weeping woman who had spent years drinking my champagne and tearing me down behind my back. I did not reach out to help her up. Black family loyalty is not a shield to cover for parasitic criminals. I said, my voice steady, carrying a lethal quiet intensity that forced everyone in the room to lean in and listen. You do not get to invoke the solidarity of our culture to protect lazy men who try to steal the hard-earned wealth of Black women. You and your family have sucked my blood for far too long. You wanted to live the high life on my dime while treating me like a maid. Now the bank is permanently closed. Get up off this floor and go pay your own debts. Vanessa gasped, covering her face with her trembling hands as she realized I was completely impenetrable. I stepped around her, leaving her sobbing on the marble tiles. The federal agents began frog-marching Marcus and Todd down the center aisle of the ballroom. The press cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every second of their ultimate humiliation. They were being paraded out like common thieves, stripped of their dignity, their wealth, and their freedom. As they neared the exit doors, the catering staff stepped aside to clear the path. Standing frozen among the service crew was Chloe. She was wearing a cheap, stained catering uniform, her hair tied back under a tight, unglamorous net. She had been assigned to work the very gala she once expected to attend, as royalty. Chloe stood paralyzed, clutching a large silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes. She locked eyes with Marcus as he was dragged past her in handcuffs. She watched the father who promised her the world get hauled away to federal prison. Her hands began to shake violently. The heavy silver tray slipped from her grasp, crashing onto the hard floor. The crystal glasses shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, echoing the absolute destruction of their entire fraudulent dynasty. The morning after the Atlanta Black Excellence Gala, the entire city woke up to a seismic shockwave. The local and national news outlets were completely saturated with the story. The headlines flashed across every television screen and social media platform, detailing the dramatic arrest of a prominent businessman and his disgraced lawyer, brother-in-law. The footage of Marcus being frog-marched out of the grand ballroom in handcuffs went viral instantly. The high society of Atlanta, which usually kept its scandals tightly under wraps, could talk of absolutely nothing else. But while the gossip columns feasted on the downfall of my treacherous husband, the financial world focused its attention entirely on me. Market analysts praised my ruthless efficiency. By exposing the corruption and neutralizing the threat before a single dollar could be stolen, I demonstrated absolute unyielding leadership. When the stock market opened on Monday morning, the shares connected to Obsidian Partners skyrocketed. Investors flooded our portfolios with fresh capital. My transparent handling of the crisis solidified my reputation as an impenetrable force. I was no longer just a successful executive. I was a financial titan who had successfully defended her empire on a public stage. My corporate headquarters buzzed with celebratory energy, but I remained completely focused, securely seated at the top of the throne I built. While my corporate valuation climbed into the stratosphere, Marcus was experiencing a drastically different reality inside the Fulton County Jail. His custom velvet tuxedo had been confiscated and replaced by a stiff, bright orange jumpsuit. The man who had strutted into the gala, feeling like an untouchable king, was now sitting on a rigid metal cot, surrounded by cold concrete walls and heavy iron bars. Yet his profound delusion remained entirely intact. Marcus completely refused to accept his situation. He rejected the advice of his court-appointed public defender, adamantly refusing to accept any plea deals. In his twisted mind, he still believed he could charm his way out of this disaster. He firmly believed that if he could just hear my voice, he could manipulate me into dropping the federal charges. He used his daily allotted phone calls to dial my private cellular number. I was sitting at my mahogany desk, reviewing a highly profitable quarterly report when my phone screen lit up. The caller identification displayed a generic automated number originating from the county correctional facility. An automated voice instructed me to accept a collect call from an inmate named Marcus. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel sadness. I listened to the automated prompt with absolute cold detachment. I pressed the decline button and then navigated directly into my phone settings, permanently blocking the prison outgoing number. I was not going to waste a single second of my highly valuable time listening to the pathetic apologies of a convicted fraudster. He was dead to me. The collateral damage of Marcus's arrogance was hitting his daughter just as hard. Chloe had been immediately terminated from the catering company the moment she dropped that silver tray of crystal champagne flutes at the gala. The catering manager had screamed at her, demanding she leave the premises before the police had even finished clearing the ballroom. Chloe had stumbled back to the cheap rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. She thought she could hide there and formulate a plan. But reality knocked on her door the very next morning. The motel manager informed her that her weekly payment was heavily past due. With zero cash in her pocket and her bank account still completely frozen, Chloe was physically evicted from the dingy room. She dragged her heavy, oversized luxury suitcases out to the cracked sidewalk bordering a busy, noisy highway. Desperation finally broke through her stubborn pride. She pulled out her phone and began dialing the numbers of the wealthy girls she used to call her sisters. She begged them for a place to crash just for a few nights, promising she would pay them back once the misunderstanding was cleared up. One by one, they all gave her identical responses. They told her their parents had explicitly forbidden them from associating with the daughter of an exposed criminal. The final girl she called simply laughed and hung up the phone. Chloe sat on her expensive luggage as heavy rain began to fall, soaking her cheap catering uniform. She was completely isolated and entirely alone in a world she used to believe she ruled. Her designer bags were now just heavy burdens anchoring her to the wet pavement. The destruction of their fake dynasty spared absolutely no one who had participated in the betrayal. While Marcus sat in a jail cell and Chloe wept on the side of a highway, Vanessa was facing her own ultimate reckoning. With Todd locked away and his legal career permanently destroyed, the false financial foundation holding up their lives instantly evaporated. Without Marcus to funnel my money into her bank accounts, Vanessa could not cover a single bill. The final blow arrived on a Tuesday morning. 2 county sheriffs arrived at her suburban home accompanied by an aggressive bank representative. They handed her a formal notice of immediate foreclosure. Vanessa was given exactly 1 hour to pack her personal belongings. She scrambled through her house crying hysterically, grabbing whatever clothes she could fit into a single duffel bag. She had spent years mocking people who struggled financially, viewing poverty as a personal moral failure. She had proudly sat at country club tables sipping champagne, bought with my money, looking down her nose at the world. Now she was the one being thrown out onto the street. With no money and her social circle entirely abandoning her, Vanessa had to purchase a cheap one-way bus ticket. She was forced to return to the tiny rural town in South Georgia she had spent her entire adult life running away from. As she sat near the back of the crowded bus, smelling of diesel exhaust and stale air, she stared out the window at the passing highway. She had to move into the cramped spare bedroom of a distant elderly aunt she used to openly despise. The luxurious, glamorous life she tried to steal from me was gone forever, leaving her to rot in the exact impoverished existence she had always considered beneath her. The federal courthouse in Atlanta was a fortress. The courtroom was packed to capacity with journalists and members of high society wanting to witness the final chapter of the financial scandal of the decade. I sat in the front row, wearing a tailored charcoal gray power suit. My expression gave away nothing. At the defense tables, Marcus and Todd sat as far apart as possible. The unbreakable bond of brotherhood they paraded around my house had evaporated. They were no longer kings plotting to steal my empire. They were 2 terrified, desperate men caught in a trap trying to claw each other's eyes out. When the trial commenced, the defense strategy became painfully clear. Todd took the stand first, attempting to use his polished legal background to manipulate the jury. He leaned heavily into the arrogant presumption that a white professional like himself could never intentionally participate in such a crude fraud. Todd spun a narrative portraying himself as a dedicated family man who simply trusted his brother-in-law too much. He wiped away fake tears, claiming Marcus was a deceptive man who used his charismatic charm to trick a naive lawyer into notarizing false paperwork. Todd threw Marcus under the bus with such speed that Marcus jumped out of his seat, screaming profanities until the bailiffs forced him back down. Then it was my turn to take the witness stand. The entire courtroom fell into a breathless silence. I walked up to the stand, my heels clicking sharply against the floorboards. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took my seat. I looked directly at Todd and Marcus. They flinched under my penetrating gaze. The prosecutor asked the pivotal question about how I uncovered their premeditated conspiracy. I turned my attention to the judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman with decades of experience. "Your Honor," I stated clearly, "my ex-husband and his brother-in-law believed I was an emotional, easily manipulated woman. They believed my wealth was simply waiting to be harvested. What they failed to realize was that I secure my investments with the highest level of surveillance technology available. I submitted a digital storage drive containing irrefutable evidence of their conspiracy." The prosecutor requested permission to play the primary exhibit, A large monitor was wheeled in front of the jury box. The screen flickered, displaying the high-definition security footage from my formal dining room. It was the exact video from the night of my anniversary dinner. The courtroom watched as Marcus and Todd laughed and celebrated the moment I walked out. The directional microphones picked up every whisper in pristine audio quality. The jury listened in sheer horror as Marcus proudly declared, "I was nothing but a personal ATM," and discussed his plans to stage a divorce to steal my wealth. Several jurors visibly gasped. But the most damning piece of evidence was yet to come. The video clearly showed Todd leaning across the table, his eyes glowing with malicious greed. The court heard Todd explicitly instruct Marcus to bring him the property deeds. They heard Todd proudly volunteer to personally forge my signature as the official notary to take out secret secondary mortgages. Todd's carefully constructed narrative of being a naive, manipulated victim was completely obliterated. He was the primary architect of the entire fraudulent scheme. Todd collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. He let out a pathetic sob, realizing his legal career and freedom were permanently destroyed. Marcus stared at the monitor, unable to process the absolute finality of the evidence. They had literally filmed their own confession. The jury did not even need a full hour to deliberate. They returned with a swift, unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge demanded Marcus and Todd stand for sentencing. She looked down at them with profound disgust. "You two men attempted to exploit and financially ruin a successful businesswoman simply because your fragile egos could not tolerate her success," she stated, her voice ringing with authority. "You abused your familial ties and legal privileges to commit a brazen act of federal fraud." The judge slammed her gavel. "Marcus Julian Vance, I sentence you to 10 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole." Marcus dropped his head, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably as the reality of a decade behind bars crashed down upon him. "Todd William Miller," the judge continued, "for your role as the mastermind of this conspiracy and your gross abuse of legal trust, I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison. You are ordered to pay $3 million in financial restitution. Your permanent disbarment remains firmly in effect. You will never practice law again." The heavy wooden doors swung open as federal marshals entered to transport the prisoners. Handcuffs were swiftly clamped around their wrists. As the marshals began to lead them toward the holding cells, Marcus suddenly dug his heels into the floor, stopping right in front of the wooden gate, separating the gallery from the court. He turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes were red, bloodshot, and completely hollowed out by absolute despair. He looked like a shattered, broken shell of the arrogant man who had once demanded I know my place. "I have lost everything," Naomi, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking with miserable, desperate agony. "My business is gone, my family is destroyed, my life is over. Are you happy now?" I stood up slowly, buttoning my suit jacket. I walked right up to the wooden gate, stopping just inches away from his chained hands. I looked into his defeated eyes and offered him a single razor-sharp smile. "I am not happy because you lost everything, Marcus," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any pity or remorse. "I am happy because I finally took back exactly what belongs to me. Enjoy your new home." The dust had completely settled over the city of Atlanta. Months had passed since the heavy wooden gavel slammed down in the federal courthouse, sealing the fates of the men who tried to ruin me. The echoes of that highly publicized trial still lingered in the boardrooms and exclusive country clubs across the state. My corporate empire was not just surviving the scandal, it was thriving on a scale I had only ever dreamed of. The massive public spectacle that was supposed to humiliate me and shatter my professional reputation had instead cemented my legacy as an absolute force of nature in the financial world. I was no longer just the chief executive officer of Obsidian Partners. I was a widely recognized symbol of unyielding boundary setting and corporate brilliance. This newfound status brought a steady, relentless stream of media requests. I declined almost all of them, preferring to let my balance sheets and philanthropic initiatives speak for themselves. However, I agreed to one exclusive final interview with a highly respected national journalist. I wanted to completely control the final narrative and close this chapter of my life on my own precise terms. The television crew had spent the entire morning transforming the grand living room of my Buckhead estate into a professional broadcast set. This was the exact same room where my fraudulent marriage had publicly unraveled, the same room where Marcus had allowed his spoiled daughter to disrespect me, and where Todd had arrogantly commanded me to know my place. Now the space was perfectly quiet. The heavy cameras and bright studio lights were focused entirely on me. I sat comfortably on my custom velvet armchair, the very throne I had built with my own hands. I wore a tailored ivory suit projecting an aura of absolute serenity and untouchable wealth. I held a crystal glass of vintage red wine in my hand, resting it casually on my knee. The journalist sitting across from me leaned forward. She was a sharp, perceptive woman who had closely followed the entire saga from the charity gala to the dramatic courtroom sentencing. She looked at me with a mixture of professional curiosity and deep respect. "Naomi, your rise over the past year has been nothing short of astronomical," the journalist said, her voice clear and measured. "You successfully defended your company from a massive internal threat. You exposed a deeply coordinated fraud scheme, and you completely redefined the standards of corporate accountability in this city. But the public reaction has been intensely divided. Many people in the business world call you a hero. However, there are critics, mostly in certain traditional social circles, who have labeled you the Iron Lady. They say you completely dismantled your husband and his family without a single ounce of mercy." The journalist paused, letting the heavy weight of the question hang in the quiet room. "Do you ever look back at how you handled the situation and think you were too ruthless with your former family?" I did not flinch. I took a slow, deliberate breath and looked directly into the primary camera lens. I knew millions of women would be watching this broadcast, women who were currently sitting in my former shoes. Women who were constantly shrinking themselves to make small men feel tall. "Ruthless," I repeated the word, tasting it on my tongue. I offered a soft, genuinely amused smile. No, I was not ruthless. I was simply completely and unapologetically honest. I shifted slightly in my velvet chair, making sure my posture commanded the frame. Society has spent generations conditioning women, especially successful Black women, to be the perpetual mules of the world. We are taught from a very young age that our ultimate purpose is to endure. We are told that we must be the ones to uplift everyone around us, regardless of the personal cost. We are instructed to invoke family loyalty to hold the household together at all absolute costs, even if the people inside that family are actively draining the blood from our veins. I looked at the journalist, ensuring she understood the profound gravity of my words. If a man protects his assets from thieves, he is called a shrewd businessman. But when a woman refuses to let a group of entitled parasitic adults drain her bank accounts to fund their delusions, she is suddenly labeled ruthless and cold. I reject that entire narrative completely. I was expected to smile and play the role of the grateful, submissive wife, while my ex-husband secretly plotted to steal my life's work. I was expected to nod politely while his brother-in-law used racial stereotypes to try and intimidate me in my own home. I was told to protect the image of the successful Black family, even when that family was a den of thieves. I refused to play the game. I slowly stood up from the velvet armchair. The camera operator smoothly adjusted the lens, tracking my deliberate movements. I walked past the warm, flickering fireplace and moved toward the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The sprawling, breathtaking skyline of Atlanta stretched out before me, glittering in the vibrant evening light. The city was a massive testament to ambition and power, and I owned a significant piece of it. I stood gazing out at the horizon, my reflection faint in the pristine glass. "I did not destroy their lives," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal intensity that filled the expansive room. I need everyone watching to understand that fundamental truth. I did not force Marcus to mismanage his business into bankruptcy. I did not force Todd to commit federal wire fraud and violate his sacred legal oath. I did not force Vanessa to live beyond her means or Chloe to treat the people who fed her with profound disrespect. They made those malicious choices entirely on their own. I turned back to face the camera directly, my expression devoid of any residual anger or sorrow. All I did was stop paying for their illusion. I simply closed the vault. And the fascinating thing about people who build their entire identities on stolen wealth is that they cannot survive the truth. When the money stops flowing, the truth automatically reveals itself. They destroyed themselves because without my money they had absolutely nothing left to stand on. They were hollow. I took a few slow, measured steps back toward the center of the room. The bright studio lights caught the rich crimson liquid swirling inside my crystal glass. I raised the glass of red wine toward the camera lens, offering a final definitive toast to the world. Do not ever mistake a woman's generosity for weakness. I stated, my voice resonating with absolute unyielding power and total freedom. Because once she finally recognizes her own worth and decides to permanently close the bank, you will realize you never actually held anything at all. I brought the crystal glass to my lips and took a slow, satisfying sip of the vintage wine. I lowered the glass and locked my eyes directly with the camera. My gaze was sharp, unbroken, and utterly triumphant. I had won the war, and I was exactly where I belonged. The studio lights slowly faded out, leaving only the piercing strength of my stare before the screen went completely black.